Okay, bring the committee together. Call the meeting to order for this is Minerals, Wednesday, January 25th. And our one and only bill for consideration today, Senate File 127, Wyoming Stable Token Act. You have it all in front of you. We'll call upon Senator Rothfuss for the explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Wyoming Stable Token Act is the product of the Blockchain Select Committee from the interim. It's a carryover bill from last session. It passed both chambers by good, strong margins last session, but regrettably, the governor had some concerns. There's a veto letter for the bill last year available if you want to take a look at that. But basically, during the interim, members of the select committee spent some time with the governor trying to assuage some of the concerns and address those that he raised in the veto letter. And one of the primary concerns was just having a appropriate separation mechanism and allowing this to be a concerted effort by the executive branch instead of just being housed in one agency or department. And so the primary change of this legislation, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about what it does and what the purpose is in a moment, but the primary change from last year is the mechanism, the administrative operation of it, rather than really the content of the Stable Token Act and how the stable token works. So from a little bit of an overview, the key concept here is that with digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, a lot of the concern and a lot of the volatility associated with it is that it's not necessarily a currency or a token that is backed by a negotiable asset or an asset that has stability. So we saw, for example, during this last interim, Terra Luna collapse, which was purported to be a stable coin, which means its value was supposed to be maintained, but it was what's called an algorithmic stable coin, where some math behind the scenes was supposed to keep it stable. There was a run on it, that math broke, and it went to zero value. So it really didn't have any assets backing it, and as a result, it collapsed. We also see circumstances like we saw with FTX, which was the exchange that collapsed just a couple of months ago, where one of the key problems underlying that collapse was the fact that there was no transparency of assets. There were no direct assets. So when there was a run on FTX, there weren't true assets available. They'd been collateralized, they'd been loaned off, and they weren't well tracked. Recognizing that there is a substantial legitimate economic interest in having tools available in the cryptocurrency and digital asset and digital currency space, the select committee decided that an appropriate measure would be to basically provide a digital asset, a cryptocurrency that would be asset backed, would have the confidence of business, industry, individuals in the state of Wyoming. And so in setting out to do that, what we realized is that the only way that there would be confidence in a digital asset from the state standpoint would be if it were literally backed by dollars and we held those dollars in a way that was not putting them at risk. So the mechanism that is used in the Wyoming Stable Token Act, and we'll walk through it, is we would basically exchange US dollars coming in for a Wyoming stable token going out on a token per dollar basis. We would take the dollars, we would invest those in treasuries only, and it's specifically treasury bills. So the highest security, lowest risk asset that we can buy in an appreciable quantity. And then we would hold that in trust on behalf of the token holder for as long as they wanted to use the digital asset, which would enable then a lot of the technology that we've been working on and promoting to be fluidized. And then when they want the dollar back, the dollar's there. In the meantime, as we hold those assets, the state of Wyoming receives the revenue from those assets. So we receive the revenue off of the treasuries for holding the US dollars on behalf of those trusting entities that are using the token. And that revenue then comes back to the state both to facilitate the administration of this act and program, but as it grows, it would provide revenue to the schools and to the general fund, as we'll see as we walk through the bill. So I'll stop there at kind of the 30,000 foot level real quick and see if there's any questions about what the intent is. And then after that, I'll walk through the bill and we'll get to specifics.
Senator Roth has the background on the Treasury approach. What was the pivotal point that you took in that direction?
So as far as using U.S. Treasuries, we worked with the Treasurer's Office and specifically the Chief Investment Officer, Patrick Fleming, in basically putting together the plan of how we would hold these funds. You can't just have a giant pool of cash. The state even doesn't really have that capacity. So you have to put it somewhere. You have to invest it. One option that banks use is they actually put it into the Federal Reserve System. That's not an option that we necessarily wanted to do or even would have access to. There was some quirkiness effectively to that, but there is no challenge with Treasury bills or even bonds or notes. But we chose bills because those are very short term and they ensure as much liquidity as we can have. So imagine that we're buying 90-day bills or some short-term instrument where within that period of time, we will get not only the full value of the Treasury back, there's effectively zero risk, there's only the liquidity loss for that time period. Treasuries of that type have never gone negative, but we still calculated a mechanism on the off chance that Treasuries did, for the first time in the history of the country issuing Treasuries, go negative. And I'll explain that as we walk through it a little bit, how we back that up and again, keep the state whole. So when we were putting this together, we were contemplating at a 1%, 1.5% potential return for the state on the dollars that we're holding on behalf of the token holders. At this point in time, it's over 2% effectively that we would be getting. And when we're contemplating these stable coins, stable tokens, these instruments, the global market right now in that space is on the order of $100 billion, and none of those assets are trustworthy. You would not really want or know what is underlying those assets truly at any given time. So there's a lot of risk concern, whereas you'll see through the legislation, the approach that we would use through the Wyoming Staple Token Act would be to have full transparency. This is exactly the number of tokens that have been issued. That represents exactly this number of dollars. And here they are transparently invested either in cash for a small liquidity, and then this number of treasuries with these stamps on them that will be harvested, so to speak, at a certain time and then circulated back in. So by providing full transparency as a state instrument, there can be confidence by the token holder that when they want it to be worth $1 at any given point, it is truly worth $1 because it is a digital representation of a US dollar holding trust.
One more before we go to the committee. Our US Senator was here and commended Wyoming for putting the proper sideboards in place as to not cause the problems that we're experiencing nationally. Is this act part of what she describes, in your opinion?
Absolutely. So Senator Lummis is working on, as part of the Lummis-Gillibrand Act, incorporating language about stable coins, stable tokens, and this is fully compliant with what their act would do, which means it has to be asset-backed with high-quality assets. And again, this is Wyoming leading the way and demonstrating the right way to do things, rather than what others have done, which is effectively 1928 Wall Street. Just, have you got an idea? All right, let's roll with it.
Thank you. Committee, questions for the sponsor? Questions? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, as an example, can you elaborate just a little bit on what these assets, these coins would be used for?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, Senator. Cryptocurrency and digital assets are desired and useful because they do conclude a transaction nearly instantaneously. And that's a true conclusion of the transaction. When we transact electronically with US dollars, we think it's going fast. It is not going fast. It is going incredibly slowly in the background, and it's expensive and it's challenging, and they're using very old school technologies that don't have full security or certainty, which is actually why we ran that bill the other day about the endangering assets. It's one of the problems for when you're dealing with a financial transaction is that you don't have financial certainty. With digital asset transactions, they're effectively instantaneous, not quite instantaneous, but there's a block closure time, which might be a minute, might be 5 minutes, something on that order before the transaction is truly concluded. They're also authoritative, and it's very easy to know who has what, when, what transactions took place. All of this work is on an open blockchain, which means the transaction history is fully transparent, so you can see who is transacting what when. That's not to say all cryptocurrencies or digital assets are fully transparent, but again, this is the open book style. And I think it's important for our digital asset, if we have a Wyoming stable token, to be on one of the transparent transaction chains. So the other value as we're moving into digital assets and virtual currencies, some blockchains have the capacity to implement what are called smart contracts, which are algorithmic transactions where you can automate things. And so financial transactions can occur quickly by contract, but by program. So we can set up a whole business. That's where we get the decentralized autonomous organizations, the DAOs that we have established as the first state in the country that has a DAO LLC. And there are over 500 DAOs now registered in the state of Wyoming since we've put that act forward. So having the capacity to have these rapidly facilitated transactions saves money and time for the entities that take advantage of it. The state of Wyoming could and should take advantage of this at some point. It would save us time and money not to have to cut checks if we have the capacity to make instantaneous payments as needed. But we don't have an instrument that we could trust. You can't jam a US dollar into a blockchain. It just doesn't work. So this functionalizes that, where we're taking a true US dollar, which again, a token is a digital representation of an asset as opposed to a coin, which is the asset. And this is the digital representation of that dollar. And then all of a sudden, everything that people are enabling right now as what is called Web3, which is kind of the integration of digital assets into the internet and networking space, as that is all enabled, there would be an asset that you can have confidence is going to keep its value to engage in those transactions. Volatility is really a problem unless you're investing. If you're investing, you're okay with volatility. If you're selling coffee, you don't want volatility. You don't want the value of your asset to decrease by the amount, a greater amount than your profit margin on your cup of coffee during the transaction of your cup of coffee. That's bad. So if you know that it's worth $1 at the end of the day, at the end of next week, whatever else, then it enables our small businesses or our large businesses to actually engage in this type of merchant service and financial transaction. Which again, this is one more puzzle piece. We talk about that in the Blockchain Select Committee, that it's not just any one thing that enables all of this, but a lot of different pieces. And Wyoming continues to lead in really all of these spaces. And this is one of the keys to getting it done. One thing I will note, which I think is important, is at some point, the federal government will have something which does this. I don't know when that is. It's not soon. They're looking at it, they write white papers about it, and this functionality is understood to be valuable, but the feds aren't probably doing it anytime soon. So 5 to 8 years would sort of be the soonest I would expect. The European Union, the euro, will probably happen before the US dollar. But again, very unlikely that it happens anytime soon. So there is a time period where this will be a very valuable instrument. I don't know if it will continue to be valuable after that time, but as we bridge that gap, it puts Wyoming in the driver's seat and in the pole position specifically.
Thank you. Senators, questions? Okay.
So I walk through the bill quickly?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So page 2 and page 3 are definitions. This sets up a commission as the instrument that implements the Wyoming Stable Token Act. And you'll see that we're going to build that as we move through. So when we look at commission, director, board, we're talking about specifically this Wyoming Stable Token Commission that we're going to set up. On page 3, Wyoming Stable Token Commission is hereby established. This language is largely mirror language from what you get for establishing commissions. So as we look through a lot of the rest of the language, it was mirrored from establishing a commission under Wyoming statute. Page 4 The B paragraph establishes that commission. This is the aspect that is really intended to help satisfy some of the concerns that were raised by the governor, where the commission would be governed by a governor's designee, auditor's designee, treasurer's designee, and then not more than 4 subject matter experts selected by those other members. In conversation, it might be valuable to have, and we could do this through amendment, or maybe we'd end up being the unofficial members. In the early period of time, members of the select committee on blockchain might join in as ex officio members on non-voting members, since this is an executive function. That's not here right now, but that was certainly something that was discussed so that we can be a part of the formative phase. You see standard language in C of providing reimbursement for expenses. Bottom of page 4 onto page 5. These are statutory constructs that relate to how commissions and boards operate under Wyoming statute. And, we can get the green books and go through all of those if anyone desires. I should probably print those out for later. Key concept, though, page 5, is the Wyoming stable token value and limitations. A Wyoming stable token is a virtual currency representative of and redeemable for $1 United States dollar held in trust by the state of Wyoming. And stable tokens shall only be issued in exchange for United States dollars. That's really a key provision. The state of Wyoming cannot issue a currency or coin money. This construct and the utilization of a token makes it clear that we're not doing that. We are effectively just holding that dollar in trust and giving the capacity to use it through a virtual currency tool set. Powers of the commission is basically to carry out the act. Onto page 6, you see the commission may, and here are some key provisions, issue Wyoming stable tokens as provided in the act, and they have to provide reporting and auditing. 2 is retain professional services. To be clear, the state of Wyoming and state entities won't be firsthand doing a great deal of this. We don't have the computational capacity or the instrumentation to do it, so we would contract very likely, and it's not explicit here, but we would contract with a facilitating financial institution that has the wherewithal to implement these types of transactions, and those are out there. Make and enter into contracts and agreements with institutions to provide research, et cetera. They're allowed to select the financial institutions to manage the Wyoming stable tokens. On page 7, seek rulings and guidance from the feds. This is to make sure that we're comporting with federal law, and there's still a lot of churn at the federal level about what is what and who's allowed to do what. So we need to make sure that we're keeping compliant. Romanet 6, utilize, and this is very important, utilize the services of the state treasurer's office in investing and managing the Wyoming stable token trust account. We'll get to what the trust account is, but that's basically the investment account that is invested in treasuries. We already have the capacity within the treasurer's office to do direct investments and purchases in treasuries, and they have expertise in that space. So they're interested in doing that work firsthand.
Go ahead, Senator.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, do you want us to ask questions as we
Please.
go?
Yeah,
One is bottom of page 6, Romanet 4, financial institutions. I know we've had discussions about, is that just banks or credit unions? And just wanting clarification so I understand, is it both?
It could potentially be both. It would likely be state chartered, though, in the end, for some aspects of it. And then it might be a large federal financial institution if we end up having to use their brokerage aspects instead of doing everything through the Treasury. Or if they're holding money, we might have to go with a very large financial institution to hold the cash. And the Treasurer's office already has those types of relationships, so we'd most likely facilitate through the Treasurer's office and some of that. The special purpose depository institution entities that we created a few years ago would be ideal for 4. And it's kind of my hope that it goes that direction, but again, no predisposition that that's the way it turns out.
That's your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm just wondering if we have an existing definition than a financial institution, so that's clear
Senator?
somewhere along down or throughout the act.
It's not in this act, but it is in the, and again, we were sort of asserting that it would be equivalent to what the definitions are within the Division of Banking, Title 13, I want to say, where financial institutions are clarified. I think, is that right? No, not there. We do have a definition in the act. My apologies. Let me see.
All right,
I
Senator,
thought we were relying elsewhere.
tell us about your definition.
We do. Romanet 4, page 2, I'm sorry. We wrote our own since it wasn't in that title. Means any entity approved by the commission to act as a manager or otherwise to manage, operate, and maintain Wyoming stable tokens.
Continue.
Let's see. So we are on page 7, I believe. Yep,
He is right
7.
here.
So Romanet 7 was employee director and other employees as necessary for the commission. Then you see as D, the commission shall maintain and reinvest the assets, work with consultants, et cetera, and we'll see some provisions about how that's carried out in the trust aspect of it moving forward. Page 8, Romanet 2. The review and audit aspect is critical. This is something that can be automated. There are service providers that can do this, and what we would probably end up doing, again, a lot of this would be worked out, but what we've talked about is using a third-party audit provider that provides instantaneous auditing capacity to ensure that the coins that are listed are truly issued, as well as, or the tokens that are listed are truly issued, and that the what cash is available and what securities are backing it, which is again going to simply be the treasuries. In E provision on page 8, it just indicates that before issuing that first stable token, they need to come back and report to the Blockchain Select Committee, as well as the the Blockchain Select Committee for anything they're doing before they provide any issuance.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, 2 questions.
Yep.
On page 7, the employment of the director, I'm just kind of curious what you contemplate the salary range might be.
Senator Office.
It's a good question, and again, trying to get somebody that's experienced in the field, it is hard to say what directors are going for. If we look to the salaries of, for example, the Wyoming Energy Authority or the director of the Banking Commission, I don't think they actually have a executive director. I think they work with a division of banking, but I'm not sure of that. We can probably get some estimates from them of what it might be. Director of the OGCC also is reporting to a board, so it would be similar in that capacity. Those are good salaries.
Follow-up?
Yes, a follow-up, Chairman. Then on page 8, paragraph E, the reporting duty to the Blockchain Committee. I'm wondering when, or if there's ever going to be a point where it's appropriate to have these updates provided to Select Minerals. It seems like these all seem to floater minerals. I guess I'm curious to know what our chairman might think of that too.
Senator.
Happy to. At this point, as we're getting up and running, this is sort of the first, let's make sure that there's a report back to blockchain. Anything related to banking in the original formative statute for the Blockchain Select Committee, if it truly is a banking bill and related to the banking and trust title, it actually has to originate in the Minerals Committee. That was part of our enabling act, so to speak. This is not in that statute, though. This is in the digital asset statute.
So Senator, what's the logistics to get the reports back to here?
If you would like those reports, we can certainly add that. Although I think they do report back in a moment. Let's see. I thought there was further reporting for the ongoing. If there's not and we want that, we can add it. No, we can add that
Right.
if we want them to come back to the Minerals Committee, we can get them to come back
Senator
to the
Ellis,
Minerals Committee.
let's have you insert that, and Linda would like it now if she could.
Mr. Chairman, I'll wait until we start working the bill, but I'll make a note of it.
Sounds good. Bottom of page 8 are the accounts. There are 2 accounts. The first account is the Wyoming Stable Token Trust account. It's created. And this is the account in which the commission shall deposit all funds received for the issuance of Wyoming stable tokens into the account. So as dollars come in exchange for the tokens, they all go into the trust account. Nothing gets spent out of the trust account effectively, except you hand over the tokens in exchange for that first 100%. So you don't get to buy things out of the trust account. It is an account held in trust. And you'll see that it shall not be, bottom 22 and 23, shall not be expended for any other purpose, but shall be expended to redeem Wyoming stable tokens. And then you see here the next line, the commission shall invest funds within the account exclusively in United States Treasury bills. By creation of this trust, the state does not create any fiduciary duty to token holders. You'll see that we go into that in great length about 3 more times. Investment, and this is important, investment earnings generated by the funds in the account may be deposited in the Wyoming Stable Token Administration account as provided in subsection B of this account. So the other account, which is actually created in the C provision, we'll get to that in a moment, is the Wyoming Stable Token Administration account. But looking at B, not less than 100% of the notional value, so that's the equivalent of the tokens, of all outstanding issued Wyoming stable tokens shall be maintained in the Wyoming Stable Token Trust account. All earnings paid on funds and investments in the account shall be deposited in the account. That's sort of our accounting procedures. So all the revenue from the treasuries first go into that account. And then you see investment earnings on funds in the account in excess of 102% of the notional value of all outstanding issued Wyoming stable tokens shall be transferred to the Wyoming Stable Token Administration account. So what that means is you fill that trust account up until it reaches 102%. So 100% pays everybody back. We're going to a 102% reserve, which more than pays everybody back. And we'll get to the reason for that in a moment. After you get above 102%, money is going to pour over into the administration account, which is created in C. And funds in there are first used to pay for the operations of the commission and then can be retained for some future expenditures you see in Romanet 2. And then Romanet 3 gets to an appropriation associated with it that any remainder shall be distributed first to the general fund until the initial $500,000 transferred upon this act becoming effective is repaid in full. So it's basically taken as a startup loan, $500,000 startup loan to get rolling. And so revenue off the top goes to pay back the loan, so to speak, from the general fund to operate this system. And then after that, it gets paid equally on a quarterly basis into the Common School Permanent Fund Reserve Account, the School Foundation Program Account, and the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account. And remember, the spaghetti says that if those get full, it pours over into their corpuses. Redemption, you see, gets into the language of how that 102% is used, and this is important language on page 11. 1 Wyoming stable token shall be redeemable for 1 United States dollar upon demand as set forth by rule of the commission. This is important because one of the discussions about setting that rule up is that it might not be instantaneous. The treasuries are going to have a lifetime on them, and one of the concepts or structures the commission would set is if you want to redeem $100 million worth of Wyoming stable tokens and the liquidity in cash isn't there at the time, then we might make you wait or take a discount, which is very reasonable. So if you want all your money back, wait until we've got it and we'll have it because they're treasuries. If you want it all back right now, you'll see here that as we move down, if you want it liquidated immediately and we don't have it in cash, then we may provide you slightly less depending on what the value of the asset is in the treasury. And that's why we have the 102% to make sure we don't have to do that also under most circumstances. You see on lines 3 and 4, the value of the Wyoming stable token upon redemption shall be 1 United States dollar for each 1 Wyoming stable token unless the interest rate of the United States Treasury bills at the time of redemption is negative. That's never happened. But that's condition number 1, when we might not pay a full 1, or the total assets available in the Wyoming Stable Token Trust account divided by the number of outstanding Wyoming stable tokens is less than $1. And honestly, the only conditions we could come up with where that would ever happen would be if, for a while, the US Treasury rates actually went negative. We could come up with no other scenarios, but we wrote it this way just in case. In which case, the value of the Wyoming stable token upon redemption shall be the liquidated value of the United States Treasury bill redeemed to pay the demand for the Wyoming stable token as determined by rule of the commission. So if you're looking at the discount, though, that's not a significant discount. And the 2% was calculated, that 2% buffer was calculated based on a little bit of the back of the envelope calculation that the chief investment officer and I did on, all right, how negative could they potentially go? How long is a treasury bill? What would certainly cover full liquidation of that? With a little tiny buffer, we came up with 2%. So in theory, under the worst run, the worst circumstances where everybody wanted to liquidate immediately, if we were at 102%, should be fine. But even if it isn't fine, it's just a portional loss. You can see 14, in no case shall the redemption result in the state paying a higher amount than the total assets in the Wyoming stable token trust account divided by the number of outstanding Wyoming stable tokens after all expenses have been paid as determined by the commissioner and auditor as provided by rules and regulations. So notice of limitations is important, and we have it a few times. Under rules adopted by the commission, every contract, application, or other similar document that may be used in connection with the purchase of Wyoming stable token shall clearly state that the Wyoming stable token is not insured by this state, and the principal deposited is not guaranteed by the state beyond the notional value of the Wyoming stable token trust account. So we're on the hook for what's in that account. We're not on the hook for more than that. And then you see under limitations of liability, that language is statutorily reiterated that the state shall not be liable to any person for any amount beyond the notional value of the fund maintained in the Wyoming stable token trust account. And it goes on to reinforce that several times. You see the Wyoming stable token shall not constitute any indebtedness or a debt within the meaning of any constitutional or statutory provision or limitation. On line 20, the token shall not be considered or held to be general obligations of the state, but shall constitute special obligations of the state. And the treasurer shall not pledge the state's full faith and credit for the redemption of any Wyoming stable token. So we just kept basically writing that over and over again so that there'd be no question that we were only going to pledge the contents of that trust account. The B provision is immunity from liability consistent with other commissions. Section 2 gets into some effective date instruments except as provided in B. The commission shall issue at least one stable token not later than December 31st, 2023. So that's the deadline when they should hopefully have a preliminary issuance. And the B provision is the Attorney General shall monitor the startup phase to make sure it's permissible under federal and state law. And if they deem at some point that it is in violation of federal or state law, then they can push pause button.
Great.
Effective date. And then section 4 is the $500,000 loan to get this up and running.
Explanation.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on page 13, the line 16, 17, the commission shall issue at least one Wyoming stable token. I'm guessing that that's a given that that's going to happen, but I just want to, it just seems kind of odd, like someone shall apply or want to enter into this. I don't know how we can mandate that, so just a little discussion.
Please.
So the intent there really is to make sure that we have a good, strong deadline and that the commission is working towards that and that this doesn't just become a long study pause bill. This was a concern that the Blockchain Select Committee had, that we needed to get this done in a reasonable timeline and needed to move towards a deadline. By issuing one stable token, literally one stable token for $1 would be sufficient to meet this. We need to get it up and running. What I would anticipate, it's not in here, and it's intentionally not in here, it would be prudent to effectively pilot it, have an issuance of some number of dollars that is, a reasonable start. Run that for a little while, scale up to another issuance, and go through a few phases before you would go to open issuance, which then lets you test and ensure that the technology is there. But trying to get one coin to exist by December 31st, 2023 was the deadline we were looking to make sure that we were achieving.
All right, if there's nothing more from the committee, let's go to those in the room. Anybody would like to testify on this bill? Okay, let's go to,
Governor's office is here.
oh.
Yeah.
Okay, Governor's office. You know you, but state your name and where you go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Betsy Anderson. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and General Counsel for Governor Gordon. As Senator Rothfuss mentioned, this was vetoed by the governor last year. So I have been the person for the office that's been designated to work on this, and I did attend the select committee, blockchain committee meetings throughout the interim and try to give the governor's feedback and elaborate on the concerns that he put in his veto letter. And I will say that the committee did address several of the concerns that he had. So we really appreciate that. But at this point, I think again, because of the veto, I think you deserve to understand where he stands on this. I think I would say right now he probably has 2 overriding issues that are of concern and maybe 3 specific concerns. So that's what I will go over. So his 2 overriding concerns with the Stable Token Act for the state is number 1, he sees this as competing with the private sector. And so there are stable tokens that are issued by the private sector, and this would be in competition with them. And I don't think we ever think government should be competing with the private sector. So that would be one. And then the second kind of overriding issue is and he talks about in the veto letter kind of risk versus rewards. And the concern would be the state has made great strides in the virtual currency world, in the blockchain world, and specifically the speedy banks that we have set up. And I think the governor would hate to see that if for some reason this particular project did not succeed, that unfortunately that would not reflect just in this project, but everything the state's done in that world, and would make it difficult for us to continue to make advances. And we know we're still working on the speedy bank issue. And so those are the 2 overriding issues he has with the program as a whole. With respect to specific concerns, one would be, Senator Ellis, you brought up the deadline. There's 2 elements to that. I think once, and I've said this at the interim committee, is when there's a deadline, we have concerns that people do not make thoughtful, considered decisions. They make them in haste, and if there's this requirement that they shall issue a stable token by December 31st, then, and it's an all or nothing, if they don't do it, then they're done, then they maybe make decisions without all the information they need and make them in haste. And then the second thing I'd point out is just the practicality of what they would have to have in place by the December 31st. So you're looking at hiring an executive director, which I don't think would start the day after this bill is effective. I think there'd be some work to find an executive director, staff. You would then have to promulgate rules, and yes, they could do emergency rules, but even drafting rules would take some time. And then there's going to be a lot of contract work. You're going to have accountants, you're going to have marketing, you have to have platforms to sell it on, you're going to have somebody to build the actual token, you're going to have auditors, you're going to have independent auditors, you're going to have IT security because you can't be hacked, you've got to have know your customer and your anti-money laundering regulations, that you have covered all that. And I don't see us having that staff. So I believe that's a lot of contract work that's going to have to be put in place before you issue this. You have to have a custodial bank. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, these are things we hear every day in every committee we work on, is, do you have enough time to get the work done that we're asking? To me, this seems like something that's easily, there's a solution for it. We just push back the date if you think you need longer. I mean, we just had that conversation this morning in joint education. So I'm curious to know what your thought is on, like, what would be a more appropriate deadline that still doesn't let it linger out there. And then on the issuance of the token, I think there's some easy language that could be inserted that the commission shall be prepared to issue at least one token by whatever deadline. So I am curious, you raise good points, but what's a more suitable deadline if not December?
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis, the proposal was really more of a criteria list, that you have all these items in place and that you have, instead of an actual date. And I understand Senator Rothfuss's concern is that sometimes the executive branch gets bogged down and now you're 3 years later. There's a lot of talk about we wanted to be the first to do this. That the governor addresses that in the veto letter, that he'd rather be right than first and do this well. So instead of a date, we felt like a list of criteria of having proper contracts in place, having proper people when the rules have been promulgated, that when all that's in place, the AG review has been completed, the report to the Select Committee on Blockchain then that's when the stable token could be issued, as opposed to a date. Obviously, if you wanted to put a date in it, I don't know what date to pick. I mean, I think having it beyond the 2024 session would be good, in that if they come up with problems, they would have another session to fix what those problems might be. But I haven't really had a discussion with the governor about what he thinks would be the right date.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up?
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So Senator Rothfuss also mentioned the concept of a phase-in pilot. I'm just trying to get us there, because I think there's a lot of good things that we're talking about. So I'm curious to know what the governor's thought is, or your thought is, if we were to try and take an attempt of phasing this in through some kind of pilot.
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I think that's better than just having a hard and fast deadline.
A question for you, and then I want Senator Rothfuss to be thinking about another session at Factor. What was you had competing with the private sector, and then you had a second major concern.
Mr. Chairman, the second one was the risk that if there is some failure, that it would not just be this particular stable token program that would be in jeopardy, but all the work the state has done in the virtual currency world, in the Speedy Bank world, that it would reflect all of our DAO work and everything we've tried to be on the front end of technology. Because, we have been working on the Federal Reserve Bank and the Speedy Bank issue, and it's not moving. And I think a lot of times people think we're just small, and that's justified or not, that's what they think. And so.
How dare they think we're small? But we would be in the news. Okay, another session for this.
Mr. Chairman, a couple things, and I appreciate all of Betsy's involvement over the interim. There's a little bit of concern that I have about moving the goalposts a bit on this. In that, to criticize the current architecture, which is actually fair, that it's going to take a while to get all these people together and ramp it up. The bill last year did it all in the treasurer's office, and they were perfectly comfortable with the timeline. So it was in-house, it was internal, and there was concern that they didn't have the capacity and that we would need to expand that capacity, and concern that it was only in the treasurer's office. This moves it outside, and now the governor's indictment of it is, wow, it's going to take a long time to get that done. Well, we waited a year to rewrite the bill, to get it to the point where it would satisfy those interests about the organizational capacity. And now the problem is the organizational capacity is going to take too long to put together. I'm happy to go back to the original bill. It was better in my opinion anyway. So if we have any shortfall in terms of the speed that it takes to get there, the original bill does that. On the second point, and again, it's not to say that we can't, pushing the date, and if the governor then comes back and says, I love the legislation now that you've moved it to March of 25, I'm all in. If that's what it takes to get the governor to support this legislation, that's great. But if it's just, and here are the 10 other things we hate, but thanks for moving it to March 25, I don't know that we need to do that. As far as the addressing the fact that it's the possibility of the private sector, I guess what I would ask, and I kind of know the answer, is would the governor on behalf of the state or the treasurer on behalf of the state be willing to accept any of the digital assets that currently exist as a means of tax payment or as any value-bearing asset? And I hope the answer is no, because I wouldn't accept any of them on behalf of the state of Wyoming. If the state of Wyoming is going to engage in this, we have to have something that has a credible dollar backing.
Ms. Anderson, your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I think there's two parts there. The first part on the deadline, I think we've always said from the beginning that that was of a concern. And I understand, one of our earlier concerns for the committee was that it was all in the treasurer's office. We felt like that they did not have the capacity to handle this. And so the interim committee did change that and created the commission with the different elected officials and the people on it. And so that was great. But to go back to that bill, the treasurer's office would still have to do all the contract work that I listed. It's not, they could not be their own custodial bank. They could not do their own marketing. They could not. So I still believe that just from a practical perspective, that this would be a big lift to get this done by the end of this year, and would be very challenging. And again, and I still think it's the same problem of, if you have to make a decision because it's all or nothing, you maybe don't take your time, make sure you have the right information, and make a good, considered, thoughtful process to make that decision. So I don't feel like that makes a difference in the issue about the deadline, which is, like I said, it's in the veto letter. It's always something that's been a concern. On the second thing about accepting other assets, that would actually be something, I've not had that conversation with the governor, and I don't know where he stands on that.
We'll leave that open then. Anything else you have?
Mr. Chairman, I had two other specific, maybe three other specific things. One was, I don't know where the $500,000 comes from. We talked about a business plan. I do think there's some fiscal notes that I don't get to see all of it. I see a summary on the website. But I do think a salary for somebody that has the wherewithal to be an executive director for this is going to be one of our higher classified, higher paid employees for the state. And all this contract work, I think, I don't know, maybe it can be done for $500,000, but I haven't seen that. Haven't seen anything about what criteria for an executive director, and what type of experience you'd want to see. And then all the contracting. In some of this, I'm not a technology person. This is not my bailiwick. So I'm kind of, just from what I'm hearing, the type of contracts that would be needed. So that was another concern we expressed over the summer, over the interim. And then third, something that was pointed out to me is just the commission currently has the governor, the auditor, and the treasurer are their designee, and then up to 4 people from the public. If they were to pick 4 people, you would have a commission that is now a majority is non-state officials. And I don't know if that is what you would want, is to have a majority of non-state officials who would control this program and control the state assets and funds and the operation of this program. So I just would point that out. And then just one other thing I do want to make, to go back to the risk part of this, there is the know your customer and anti-money laundering issues here. And while the bill does have a lot of language about how the state's not liable in certain situations with redemptions, I don't think you can absolve yourself from those regulatory requirements. And if there was a failure on a KYC issue and some money laundering was to occur. I just don't know. I have not researched that issue, but I don't know what the federal regulatory departments would say or.
Think about that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
to quickly address the last one first. Any financial institution we worked with would probably be the public-facing entity and unquestionably would be dealing with KYC AML. We would not want the state of Wyoming to go in the business of doing KYC AML work. That would be a nightmare. So that's not going to end up being a plan, is doing the KYC AML. And so those transactions, if you're switching from USD to crypto or back again, you'll have to have a KYC AML relationship with whoever you're doing that transaction with, which would necessitate some type of an exchange entity, which is how the other stable tokens do it to get around KYC AML. They don't do the direct KYC AML. They would have a relationship with another financial institution acting on behalf of the state for the transaction. So that shouldn't be any sort of problem unless we're doing it horribly, horribly wrong, I would think. With regard to the 4 subject matter experts, they're appointed by the board, and it doesn't say they have to be public, or excuse me, private sector, excuse me. It just says that 4 more people that know what they're talking about that are in this space. And so if these 3 entities, the governor, the auditor, and the treasurer, feel comfortable with all of them being from the private sector, okay. If they would rather have 2 more experts from within the government, that would be fine too. It effectively leaves that up to their discretion. So there's no requirement on that, and it would be at their discretion. The last point that I didn't address a moment ago, but I think it's worth talking about, is the risk versus reward of damaging the reputation of the state of Wyoming for all of the things that we've developed in Speedy Banks and DAOs and everything else. I guess the concern I have is this. Every one of those has been first. And that's the reason why it gets attention. It's the leader. You were involved in a lot of that early work. It's all from the select committee. It's all coordinated by the select committee. And it's the select committee that believes this is the next piece. That is the creative work of the select committee. It is the product of the select committee. And it has always been developed from the attitude of second is the first loser. Because in this space, there are plenty of other states that have equivalent credit card laws to the state of South Dakota. But South Dakota is the entity that got there first in changing their laws. And that's why 50% of credit card companies have their headquarters there. It does matter to do this first. To dot all of our I's, cross all of our T's, take our time methodically, and 5 years from now, issue a stable token 4 years after Colorado does it, for example. No one's going to use it. There'll be no benefit to the state. There'll be no transition as well as the delay. So I do understand the governor's concerns here, and believe me, I've had this conversation with him like 20 times. But I think it's important to note that all of these things that might be potentially at risk if this doesn't go perfect are the product of the Blockchain Task Force Select Committee and the legislature over the years in conjunction and cooperation with the governor and past Governor Mead. We take it seriously too, right? It's important for us to do this well. And the idea that the governor suggests that we're playing fast and loose with the reputation of the state at this point in time, I don't know, it doesn't ring well. It doesn't ring true. So.
Okay. Anything else from the governor's office?
Mr. Chairman, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. I see the concerns. Okay, let's go ahead. Your name, if you would, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is, and members of the committee, my name is Sean Murphy. I am here representing myself as a investor and advisor in this space. I have been supporting this legislation and the blockchain committee since it began. I call this bill the little engine that could for Wyoming. This is my bailiwick. And though I don't know many things, I understand stable tokens and I understand the technology and the need for this legislation for Wyoming. I think what's very important to communicate here that wasn't really touched upon is central bank digital currencies. Those are called CBDCs. China has one called the digital yuan. Senator Rothfuss mentioned the European Union is working on it and that we would see one here in the US. I think it will be sooner than 5 to 8 years. I think it's imminent and inevitable that our Federal Reserve System, and they've developed this, it's called Project Hamilton, and they're piloting it at the Boston Federal Reserve, that they're developing a CBDC. And I can speak with much conviction, Wyomingites do not want a CBDC. We do not want one because it's easy to track and trace digital currency. And that's exactly what's going to happen with a US CBDC. And that's exactly what's happening with the digital yuan. It's a mechanism of financial control. So what this legislation does is it offers something that, and this directly addresses what we heard from the governor's office. It doesn't compete with private interests. It will compete with the federal interests of a CBDC. This is a very important distinction to make because when there is a US CBDC, and in this case, a Wyoming stable token, we would be competing against that. So this is really, it's not a innovative or a progressive or some technology bill. This is a fiscally conservative states' rights bill. That's what this is doing. And I think it is absolutely critical. So that first piece, this isn't competing with private industry. And private industry isn't doing it well. So as an investor, let's say I want to move $10,000 from one cryptocurrency to another, and I use what's called USDC. They have a market cap, I hear, $43 billion. There's another one called USDT. It has a market cap of $67 billion. And this is what investors and people use to transact money. Say I have $10,000 and I want to move it around through this stable coin. Well, what happens is I'm going to get charged a transaction fee. So for $10,000, I'm going to get hit anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 potentially to move that around on the Ethereum network. And what we can do here, and I can outline the plan and address the governor's concerns on these, is we can do this quickly. And I can tell you the plan very simply. You would hire a company like IOHK that's been very supportive to the University of Wyoming. They're the developers of Cardano. They would address all the technology concerns. There's your contract developer. You'd hire a local accounting team. There's your accounting team. And you would work with one of the speedy banks, probably Custodia, given their relationship with the Select Blockchain Committee. And all of those concerns that we just heard, I just addressed all of them, and it could be done within ease on the timeline that's in this legislation. So the first one about the public and private competition, I don't think that's the case. And the other one I wrote down, the fear of casting the bad light on the state. I think that's an unfounded concern. And within the private community and the businesses, the ones that are driving this industry, the real elephant in the room is the Federal Reserve. And we have Custodia. They're in a lawsuit with the Federal Reserve. My dad's law firm is representing Custodia. And what we have going on here is it's going to be a Federal Reserve issue with a CBDC. And among private citizens, there is the concern that we have several elected officials that are more on the side of the Federal Reserve and not on the side of Wyomingites that don't want to have their tokens traced by the government. And so this takes us back to that this is a states' rights issue where we want to have a stable token that's as stable as it can be. Cannot have anything more stable than it being backed by US Treasuries. This is a brilliant piece of legislation in that regard. It's brilliant in that way, but it's not going to reflect poorly on the state. What's going to reflect poorly on the state is if there's a CBDC in the years to come, and we miss the opportunity to have something that Wyomingites could transact in where they weren't being tracked and traced. So like remember Canada with the truckers and all of the financial issues with that? If there was a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, you can turn that off. You can track everybody's transactions. You know exactly what's happening when you move from paper money to digital money. And what we're offering here and what will really help Wyomingites is having this stable token that is not going to be bound by that tracking and tracing that a CBDC will have. So we can get ahead of that now. and we can be thoughtful and we can be mindful. We're not hitting the gas on anything. I mean, we've been looking at this for years. It's just taken a while to get the momentum, and with the veto, that set things back. But I think we've addressed those two big issues, the competing with public. It's not competing with public or private. It's competing with CBDC in the future. And I don't think it casts a bad light on it. In fact, it does the opposite. It will show that we're supporting financial security, fiscal conservatism, states' rights. Like it will do the complete opposite, and we don't have to hit the gas. So I can go into more detail. We can talk about contracting with companies, but
Let's do this.
Yeah.
You've outlined the contracting.
yeah,
got a
I
question.
think we're ready to
Got a-
go on this,
yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Understood. I got a question before we open it up for somebody else. How do you see, you say we're competing at the federal level? How would you see the state of Wyoming competing at that level?
When there is a central bank digital currency, I believe that is inevitable. China has one, the digital yuan, and the European Union is going to have one too. And given the trajectory that our country federally is piloting this at the Boston Federal Reserve, I believe it is inevitable. Senator Rothfuss said probably 5 to 8 years. I think it'll be sooner than that. We'll have a U.S. central bank digital currency. The dollar will be represented by a Federal Reserve digital dollar. And if that's the case, if we have a Wyoming stable token, people will be able to choose, do I want to transact in my Wyoming stable token or in the central bank digital currency? And I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to be in that CBDC. I don't want the federal government to be seeing my transactions. I want to be in the Wyoming stable token.
Be a fascinating day. Senator Ellis, and then we'll open it up for anybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I have been involved in setting up another commission, and one thing that we weren't very vigilant in is making sure there weren't conflicts of interest, but that's another story for another day. So I am looking at the creation of this commission and looking for your feedback, and Senator Rothfuss to chime in too. Would it be prudent for us to make it clear that any of these appointees to this commission shall not have any kind of financial conflict of interest?
You would have,
And I say that because I am concerned about the appearance of someone participating on this, but also benefiting in some financial way. But I also recognize we're looking for people who are experts in this space. So do you think that's the concern I have, is I want to make sure we have some conflict of interest language, but I wanted to get your feedback.
Senator, we'd have to have that, but our talent pool is probably a little thin, so. All right, thank you,
Unless you want to
sir.
respond.
Mr. Chairman, I would say the talent pool is thin, but I am sitting here before you.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. You're welcome.
Let's make sure we got anybody else in the room. Anybody? Let's go to the Zoom. Joel Ravel, Blockchain Select Committee. Joel? You're left. Not a patient person, is it?
We lost Joel.
All right.
Joel's on the watch list.
There's nobody else here. Committee, what's your desire with this legislation?
Move the bill.
Moved, seconded? Moved and seconded. Ellis, Cooper. Okay, page by page.
One
And I-
comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard the comment that, what if this fails? It's kind of scary. But I firmly believe if your dreams aren't big enough to scare the hell out of you, they're not big enough. So we got to reach. We got to be first. We got to step out of the what if mold, and what if we succeed? That's a great possibility. So
If it works, run for governor. If it doesn't, you'll be running for town council. Okay, page by page. Page one,
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
page two.
so I do have a technical cleanup amendment. Looks like it starts on page 10. This is just David
Sorry.
Hopkinson asked me to fix these two.
Oh.
Okay,
So when we get there,
all right, that's on page 10, page 12.
but we can walk through and we'll just
Walk
get when we
through.
get there. Yep.
Page 2, page 3, page 4.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a conceptual amendment on page 4, after line 14.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask LSO to draft language to clarify that the members appointed to the commission shall not have a personal or financial conflict of interest. I think they have some standard language So it's conceptual. I want to give LSO latitude, but that's the amendment.
Linda, are you comfortable? You were asking for written amendments, but we're doing conceptual now. Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable with a conceptual amendment? Okay, all right. And you understand what she just moved in? Repeat it one more time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that on page 4, after line 14, that we insert a paragraph or sentence to clarify that members appointed to the commission shall not have a conflict of interest.
Okay, Linda, good. All right. Motion for that amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That's passed. We'll take the, keep going. Page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I move on page 8, line 12, afterward, the word technology, insert the words "and the joint minerals, business, and economic interim committee."
Everybody understands it? Linda, we're good? Go ahead.
The only concern I would have there is this is before doing anything, and imagine a circumstance where they're ready to go in December arbitrarily. We've done our last committee meeting in November. If it were the case for the blockchain select committee, I'd literally call a blockchain select committee so we could get the report and not hold it back. I don't think the minerals committee would call itself in to hear this report. Maybe we would, maybe you'd be as excited as I am,
We have something.
but not to say that I don't want the report.
Mr. Chairman, the way I read the language, it says, before initially issuing any Wyoming stable tokens, the director shall appear before the select committee on blockchain and joint minerals to present a comprehensive report on all actions taken under this act. So if the last meeting of minerals is in October or November, I think we would just have them come talk to us then. Or if they had it ready to go by July and we were meeting in June, I don't think they'll have it that ready that fast, but I think we could make it work.
Okay,
But you're Mr. Chairman, I defer to you. You are the chairman of this committee.
I think we'll make it work on Senator Ellis's point, so. Live with that, Senator Ruffus?
Yep, absolutely. As long as we don't end up leading to a holdup because we're out of meetings. And an alternative would be,
Well,
we submit reports to committees all the time, which doesn't hold things up. But, so as soon as this report comes into existence, it can be submitted to the Minerals Committee.
I don't see that as a problem. so.
Senator Ellis, would that be satisfactory?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to wordsmith it. I take that as a friendly amendment if the senator has
Yeah, let's see.
some
Let
thoughts.
Linda know what line you're on. What are you on? The
Um,
line for Linda.
Shall appear before. Present a comprehensive. All actions undertaken in this match, we could put after, instead of the period at the end of line 13, we could put a comma, which shall also be submitted to the Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee.
Go ahead.
Senator Rothfuss, another way to skin this cat is line 10. Maybe we say, before initially issuing any stable tokens, the director shall present the select committee or present to the select committee
It works, Senator Ruffus?
and the joint minerals committee its report or a comprehensive report on all actions taken under this act.
Good with that? Senator?
Present sounds like appear. What if it were submit report or report to? Report to, we use that all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to appear.
Report to.
Yeah, that's pretty commonly.
Sorry, everyone.
Report.
Yep, shall report to, yeah, because that can be filed electronically. So the director shall report to the select committee and the minerals committee. Yep.
We're doing it that after the meeting. Would you check with Linda? Okay. All right.
Yep.
Anything else on that page? Page 9? Page 10, we have amendment, Senator. Page 10, line 9. Center office.
Let's see. Oh, my apologies, yeah. Yep, so this is where we have our first amendment. I move that we delete paragraphs and insert paragraph and delete and Romanet 2.
Moving that,
Yep,
so moved. All those in favor say aye.
aye.
Those opposed, nay. Page 10, page 12. All right, nothing between 11 and 12. We got the change on 12.
And Mr. Chairman, on page 12, I move that we delete treasurer
Okay.
and insert commission on line 23.
So moved. Okay, second, okay. That amendment's approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those no. Okay. On to page 13.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
page 13, line 16, after the word shall, insert the words be prepared to.
Say that again.
Yep, insert the words after the word shall on line 16. Commission shall be prepared to issue at least one.
Okay. It's on page 13.
Page 13, line 16.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Linda, we're gonna have both these people, Senator Rothfuss and Senator Ellis, double check with you before they leave. Okay. All right. Anything else? Motion on the bill, we have had that. Seconded, let's take a roll call.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Ellis,
Aye.
Senator Jones. Aye. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
Aye.
That's 5 ayes.
All right, thank you, committee.
Thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, indeed, thanks everybody for coming. Linda, do you have the information there for the next meeting? It's up on my desk.
Why do we use this?